Back in the late 90s, a new comet got everyone talking. But for one small, very private group, it wasn't just a cool thing to see in the sky. Nope. For them, it was a signal, a final call. We're diving into the story of Heaven's Gate, a story that ends in one of the most truly bizarre and shocking tragedies of that entire decade. So let's unpack how something like this could even happen. All right, so let's set the scene. We're not in space, not yet anyway. We're in a super wealthy suburb of San Diego. The date is March 26th, 1997. Police are called to this massive mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and they have absolutely no idea what they're about to walk into. A scene that would just completely shock the world. And this was what kicked it all off. A phone call. A really calm, anonymous 911 call comes in around 3:15 p.m. The guy on the line, who we later find out is a former member named Rio D'Angelo, basically says he'd gotten a package with some videotapes and a letter, and whatever was in it was so alarming he knew he had to call the police right away. So the sheriff's deputies go inside, and what they find is just surreal. It's a scene of complete, almost eerie order. They find 39 bodies, 21 women, 18 men, all lying peacefully in their beds. But it's the details that are just wow. Look at this. Every single person is wearing the exact same thing: black shirts, sweatpants, and brand new Nike Decade sneakers. And get this, each one had a $5 bill and 3/4 in their pocket. Their faces and chests were covered with these purple cloths. It was so methodical, so ritualistic. It was just deeply, deeply unsettling. So you can imagine this discovery just left everyone with this huge burning question. It's not just what happened, but how? I mean, how do 39 people from all different backgrounds end up making this final coordinated decision all together? To even begin to understand that, we've got to rewind. We have to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so the story of Heaven's Gate. It really boils down to the story of its two founders, a super charismatic pair who honestly believed they were messengers from space with this divine mission. The media even had a name for them, the UFO 2. So let's meet them. On one hand, you've got Marshall Applewhite. He was the son of a minister, a former music professor, and after some really tough times in his personal life, he became convinced he was basically the successor to Jesus. And then you have Bonnie Nettles. She was a nurse who was really into things like biblical prophecy and theosophy. So when these two meet in 1972, it's explosive. Nettles tells Applewhite that their meeting was literally foretold by aliens. They ditch their old names and become Do and T. And that is where this whole journey really kicks off. So in those early years, their message actually starts to catch on. They start thinking of themselves as the two witnesses from the Bible's book of Revelation. And by 1975, they're making national headlines because a group of 20 people in Oregon just up and vanished to join them. A year after that, the whole group basically goes off the grid, living this really strict, secluded life. But then, 1985, this is the big one. Bonnie Nettles, Ty, dies of cancer. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it, right? But no. Instead of shattering their beliefs, this event completely changed everything about what they believe. You see, Nettles' death caused a huge problem for their belief system. I mean, how could this supposed celestial being just die from a very human disease like cancer? The only way to make sense of it was to completely change their core beliefs about how you get to heaven. So first, let's get a handle on what their goal even was. They called it TELH, which stands for the evolutionary level above human. Or, more simply, just the next level. And you got to understand, this was not your typical idea of a spiritual heaven. They believed it was a real physical place, out there in space. And it was full of these beings who had no gender, couldn't die, and had gotten rid of their human bodies, or containers, as they called them. And this slide just lays out the change perfectly. Before 1985, the whole idea was that a UFO would literally come down, pick them up, and transform their physical bodies. But after Nettles died, they had to pivot. The body was no longer you. It was just a vehicle, a temporary shell for your consciousness. So suddenly, death wasn't a failure anymore. It became the only way to leave your vehicle behind and transfer your soul to a brand new body on the next level. See the shift? It's huge. So how do you prepare for something like that? Well, members lived in what they called the classroom. And it was exactly what it sounds like, a life of intense, extreme discipline. The entire goal was to strip away every single thing that made them human. And when I say extreme, I mean, look at this. Members had to give up everything. All their possessions, their money, gone. They had to cut off all contact with family and friends. Any kind of sexual activity was completely banned to get rid of those human urges. Even their own identities were erased. They wore identical clothes and took on these weird new names like Rikiti to show they didn't belong to Earth anymore. And that desire to get rid of all human urges, it went to a truly shocking extreme. Eight of the male members, and yes, that includes the leader, Marshall Applewhite, took the ultimate step to eliminate what they called worldly distractions. They voluntarily had surgery to be castrated. So you're probably wondering, how did this group so focused on leaving the world even survive in the world? Well, here's one of the biggest ironies of this whole story. They ran a professional web design company. I'm serious. It was called HireSource, and they were actually pretty successful, building websites for paying clients. They were making a living using the early internet, the very technology of the world they were so desperate to escape. Okay, so by the mid-90s, the group is basically just waiting. They're waiting for a sign, something to tell them that their classroom on Earth was finally over, and it was time to graduate. And then they found that sign in the night sky. That sign was the comet Hale-Bopp. When it appeared in the sky, a rumor started going around that there was a giant spaceship hiding in its tail. And for Heaven's Gate, this wasn't just a rumor. This was it. This was the ship coming to pick up their souls. You can see it right here in their own words from their website. Hale-Bopp, then's closure. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. This was the final green light. And this final act, it wasn't chaotic at all. It was a carefully planned procedure that took 3 whole days. First, they actually recorded these upbeat farewell messages, talking about how excited they were. Then, they drank a mix of phenobarbital, pudding or applesauce, and vodka. They even put plastic bags over their heads, just to be sure. And the final detail is maybe the most chilling. They did this in waves. The last people to go would clean up the scene and neatly arrange the bodies of their friends before it was their turn to exit their vehicles. When those 39 bodies were found, it sent an absolute shockwave around the world, and it left behind this really strange legacy, a sort of digital ghost that's still around even now. Of course, it turned into a massive media frenzy, and so tragically, it led to a few copycat events from former members who felt like they've been left behind. The house, it was eventually demolished. They even renamed the street to try and get rid of the memory. The whole thing was so huge that even Alan Hale, the guy who co-discovered the comet, had to publicly say how heartbroken he was that this beautiful natural event got tied to such a horrible tragedy. But this might be the weirdest part of the whole story. The group's website? It's still active. Right now, you can go to it. It's like this perfectly preserved relic from the 90s internet, and it's reportedly maintained by 2 former members who are still alive. It's just frozen in time, a digital ghost acting as their final state. You know, when you look at the whole story of Heaven's Gate, it really forces you to ask a tough question. What is the line? What separates a really strong, unwavering faith from a delusion that turns deadly? It makes you wonder about that incredibly fine, fragile boundary between the two, and what it takes to cross